The wind screamed across the icy plain as white snow swallowed the sky, and the ground became a blur of cold and frost and silence, broke only by the storm's roar and the small, weak sound of someone crying somewhere in the white nothingness. A small alien child no taller than a chair stumbled through the deep snow, his feet bare and his thin arms wrapped tight around a torn silver blanket that did little to protect him from the freezing wind that cut like knives against his skin and stole the breath from his lungs. His eyes were wide with fear and pain, and his tears had frozen to his cheeks like tiny crystals of sadness, and he could barely keep moving as the cold made his tiny legs numb and heavy, and each step felt like walking. Through wet stone he slipped and fell near a broken tree branch sticking out of the ground and tried to crawl into a half-buried pod wreckage that had crashed there sometime during the storm, and its metal was dented and cracked and steamed still rose from the broken engine. The child crawled inside the pod and curled up in the corner, where a small blue light blinked weakly, and his hand clutched a pendant that hung around his neck and inside. The pendant was a photo of an alien woman with bright eyes and a warm smile, and the child whispered something in his language that sounded like "Mama far away, not too far," though a human man named Jack walked through the same ice field with heavy boots that crunched the snow and a visor over his face that blinked with a heat tracker and scanner, and he moved carefully, watching for signs of life or trouble. Jack had been delivering supplies to an outpost, but the storm forced him to take shelter and change course, and while checking his scanner he saw something strange, a small flickering heat signal, not from any animal, not from any machine, something small, something alive and alone. Stopped and looked again, and the signal blinked twice before fading, and his heart told him that someone was out there freezing, scared, needing help, and he did not wait. He turned and followed the signal without question. As Jack moved faster, the wind grew stronger, and the snow whipped across his faceplate, and ice cracked under his feet, and he had to push through falling branches and low-hanging vines frozen solid and sharp as glass. He spoke into his cum, but there was only static. The storm was jamming everything, and he was alone out there with only his gut and his gear and the faint memory of the signal he had seen just moments ago. Then he saw it, not the child, not yet, but the smoke from the broken pod, and the heat marks in the snow leading toward the wreck, and he moved slowly and carefully, his hand ready near his weapon, though he hoped he would not need it. They reached the pod and saw a small shape inside, not moving, not making a sound, and for a moment he thought he was too late, but then he saw the rise and fall of breathing, soft and slow. He dropped to one knee and called out using his universal translator, and the voice came out calm and soft, saying, "Little one, I am here. I want to help you. Do not be afraid." The child did not answer at first. His eyes opened slowly, and he stared at Jack with a look of pure fear and confusion, and his little hand pulled the blanket tighter around him, as if trying to disappear. Jack reached into his pack and pulled out a thermal sheet and a food bar, and he placed them both just inside the pod and backed away slowly, giving the child space to decide and not feel trapped. The child reached out, slowly touched the sheet, and pulled it around his body, then held the food bar in his shaking hands and took a small bite, and Jack saw color begin to return to the child's skin, and his breathing grew stronger. Then the child spoke a single word, a whisper through the translator, "Mama," and it broke something inside Jack's heart, something that made the storm around him feel even colder. He looked around and saw no one, no ship, no signs of rescue, and he knew the child had been left here either by accident or by something worse, and he could not leave him, not now, not ever. Jack picked up the child gently and wrapped him tight in the thermal sheet and placed him in his carry bag with care and warmth, and whispered, "You're safe now, little guy, I've got you." Storm howled louder, and the snow piled higher, and Jack turned toward the direction of his camp, his feet heavy but sure, and the child held tight against his chest, warm for the first time in hours. But high in the trees far above the snow line, something moved. Something watched, two red eyes blinking in the dark, and a low growl hidden by the wind slipped into the night, as if something or someone had just taken notice, and the storm raged on the wind pushed hard against Jack's back as he carried the small alien child across the frozen valley, his boots sinking deep into the snow with each heavy step and the storm showing no signs of slowing down. As the sky turned darker and the light around them became gray and cold, the child stayed silent in his arms, wrapped in the thermal sheet, eyes half open, lips blue from the cold, his head resting against Jack's chest, his body so light it felt like he would vanish if the man loosened his grip even a little, and Jack knew every second mattered now. Each breath from the child was shallow and weak, and Jack whispered to him again and again, "Stay with me, little guy, just stay awake, we're almost there." Though the truth was, he was still far from the base, and the signal beacon had gone down the night before. Jack's path led through cracked ice and fallen trees. The storm had destroyed every marker he once knew, and his visor struggled to scan the area due to the thick snow in the air, blocking signals and heat readings, making him rely only on memory and gut feeling. Paused for a moment under a large ice rock for cover, opened his pack and pulled out a warming patch, pressing it gently on the child's chest, then checking the boy's eyes, which blinked slowly and then closed. Again, not from sleep, but from something worse, and Jack's worry grew. He reached into another pouch and took out an emergency stimulant patch usually used for wounded soldiers, and gently placed it near the child's shoulder, hoping it would boost his body just enough to survive a little longer. Until they reached the shelter, the child moved slightly and let out a soft sound that was not a word, but still something alive, something real, something fighting, and Jack held him tighter as if holding on to that spark of life with his own will. As the snow beat down harder and the sky seemed to disappear above them, the path ahead led to a narrow cliffside trail one Jack had avoided before because of its sharp edge and hidden ice traps, but now it was the fastest way back and the only chance left, and he didn't hesitate. He turned left toward the cliff as the snow howled around him like wild animals. Step by step he moved with care, feeling the path with his boots before trusting it, and watching the edge where the ground dropped into a dark, icy valley below, and with every gust of wind he leaned forward to protect the child in his arms, never letting the cold steal another inch of warmth. Suddenly, a sound echoed from behind, a deep clicking noise like metal scraping against stone, then again closer. Jack turned his head, scanning the area, but saw nothing, only white snow moving in every direction like ghosts in the storm, and the child opened his eyes a little and whispered one word, "Hunters." Jack's heart pounded harder, and he moved faster along the trail, eyes sharp, trying to see through the white wall ahead and behind, knowing that something or someone was now following them, something that did not belong to nature and carried a threat beyond cold and ice. He reached a frozen cave carved into the cliff wall and slipped inside the entrance, just big enough for one man and a child, and once inside, the noise of the wind dropped and silence returned, broken only by the soft beeping of his wrist scanner, which finally found a weak signal from the camp. He placed the child on a rock covered with thermal pads and wrapped him again in the heating sheet, then activated a small field heater from his gear, placing it close, the warm air slowly filling the cave and giving color back to the child's face, whose eyes moved toward Jack and stared quietly. Jack used his multi-tool to scan the child's body and saw signs of early frostbite bruises on his arm and neck and strange heat burns near the shoulder. None of them looked natural or caused by accident, and he frowned, his mind already connecting pieces that pointed to something darker than a crash. The pendant the child still held close flashed once, and Jack took it, gently opening the locket to see the face of the mother again, her eyes filled with peace and strength, and he whispered softly, "Don't worry, I'll bring him back to you, I promise, even if I have to cross this whole planet." A noise outside the cave broke the quiet, a soft crunch of snow under heavy feet, and Jack moved quickly, placing himself between the cave entrance and the child. Weapon-ready, eyes locked on the shadows just beyond the wall of white outside, where a tall shape moved and stopped, and then vanished again. He didn't move for a long time, waiting, listening, scanning, but the shape never returned, and the wind began to rise again, bringing with it a cold silence that felt full of watching eyes and distant threats that would not reveal themselves. Yet Jack turned back to the child, who now slept deeper than before, breathing steady but weak, and Jack knew they had little time left. The storm would last another full cycle, and the hunters, whoever they were, would not stop searching. Checked the scanner again and saw a tiny path forming to the west, leading to a nearby cave shelter built long ago by miners and forgotten by most, but still shown in old maps. Maybe it would give them cover, maybe it would lead them closer to whoever hurt the child, and maybe it would give answers. Jack packed up the gear, lifted the child once more, and stepped back into the storm, eyes sharp, heart steady, and mind ready for the long path ahead, with danger now closer than ever. The wind roared across the icy land as Jack moved through the white storm, carrying the small alien child close to his chest, while the snow bit into his skin like knives and the cold pressed down on them like a heavy blanket, trying to stop every breath and freeze every thought. Each step forward felt harder then. The last, and the child in his arms stayed quiet, wrapped in the warm thermal sheet, barely moving and breathing slow as Jack followed the path westward shown on his scanner, a path that flickered on and off as the storm fought to erase it. Jack's boots sank deep into the snow, but he kept moving, watching the shadows around them and listening to the wind for anything that did not belong, and his grip tightened around the plasma pistol at his side, though he hoped not to use it. The land ahead was rough, filled with broken hills and ice-covered rocks sharp like blades, and every few minutes Jack had to stop and shift the child's weight, careful not to drop him or let him touch the snow even for a second. He reached a frozen ridge and looked down below, where a large crack split the ground and steam rose from the middle, and he knew this place. It was once a mining zone, now abandoned, full of old equipment and tunnels that went deep into the earth. Maybe dangerous, maybe safe. Slid down the side of the ridge with care, boots digging into the slope and his free hand grabbing at old roots, frozen stiff. And when he reached the bottom, he found a half-buried tunnel with a broken door, rusted and cracked open, just enough to enter. He stepped inside, and the wind faded behind him, the silence strange and heavy, and the only sound now was the child's faint breathing and the soft hum of Jack's gear as it adjusted to the new environment, warmer but darker, filled with dust and long shadows. He laid the child down on a soft pile of old blankets he found inside, then activated 2 lanterns that filled the space with yellow light and set up a portable heater beside them, watching carefully as the child's color slowly improved and his body stopped shaking. Jack checked the old data screen on the wall, cracked but still working, and he accessed a map of the tunnels, hoping to find a better route or maybe even a clue. And after some delay, the screen flickered to life and showed something unexpected: movement detected in the lower levels. He frowned, eyes narrowing, and pulled up the sensor feed, which showed a group of life forms moving slowly through the tunnels, too many to be animals and too organized to be random wanderers, and each mark glowed with heat. Even in the frozen world above, Jack felt the pieces fall into place: the crash, the strange burns on the child, the word hunters, and now this a group searching below, moving in patterns as if they were tracking something or someone. And his gut told him they were the ones who shot the child's ship and maybe took the mother too. He picked up his rifle and switched it to silent mode, then checked the child once more, who now opened his eyes and looked around, his lips moving with effort as he pointed weakly to the tunnel and whispered again, "Mama," his voice dry and full of longing. Jack nodded and smiled gently, placing a hand on the child's head, and said softly, "I know I'll find her. Just rest now, you've done more than enough. You're strong, stronger than most." And the child blinked slowly and closed his eyes. Again, trust showing on his face, Jack moved deeper into the tunnel, following the old lights that blinked faintly overhead. And every step brought him closer to the signals moving below, and he kept to the shadows, his breath steady and his body ready for a fight if it came. He reached a corner and paused, hearing voices ahead, strange words in a rough alien tongue, and he peeked around the edge, seeing 3 tall figures dressed in thick armor, with sharp claws on their gloves and weapons that looked like spears, mixed with shotguns. They were talking, pointing at a small screen, and one of them pulled up a picture of the child, the same child Jack had just rescued, and they laughed cold and cruel, and one of them made a gesture like holding a leash while the others nodded. Rage burned in Jack's chest, but he waited, listened, watched, and when they moved he followed, staying far behind, but close enough to see where they were heading. A deep chamber marked with a red symbol on the door, glowing faintly in the dark. He heard a scream echo through the metal, a voice not the child's, but female, strong and desperate. And the hunters did not react as if used to such sounds. And Jack knew then that the mother might still be alive and held somewhere below. He returned to the child, who now sat up weakly and looked at Jack with wide eyes, and Jack knelt beside him and whispered, "I found them, they're here, and I'm going to get your mother back, no matter what, I promise you that." Child nodded slowly and held out the pendant, showing his mother's picture once more, and Jack took it and placed it in his pocket, then stood up, eyes full of fire, heart full of purpose, ready for the battle ahead in the frozen dark tunnels of the hunters. Dense snowflakes danced in the air above the frozen ridge as Jack climbed out of the tunnel, his breath steaming in the cold, his arms tired from the weight of his gear, and his mind spinning with thoughts of the hunters below and the child sleeping quietly in the old mining shelter. He looked back once, making sure the cave entrance was well hidden behind snow and rock, placing a motion alarm near it and leaving a small tracker beacon in the child's blanket in case something went wrong and he could not return quickly. The scanner on his wrist blinked again, picking up faint heat trails along the edge of the cliff's wide footprints, with deep claws dragging lines beside them, showing a pattern not of a beast but of intelligent movement, precise and deliberate, like someone tracking with purpose and time on their side. He followed the marks slowly, careful not to step too close to the edge of the cracked ice where deep valleys hid unknown dangers, and sudden winds could knock even the strongest off balance and send them falling into endless cold. The tracks led him down into a canyon where strange metal shards jutted from the ground like broken teeth, and shattered machines lay half buried in snow, and old blast marks scarred the rock walls, telling a silent story of some long-forgotten battle once fought between desperate forces. Jack moved between the wreckage, eyes alert, hands steady, every sense on high watch as a noise broke the silence. A soft crunch of snow to his left, then another behind him, like someone walking without care, without fear, and knowing they were not alone. He spun around slowly, rifle raised, but saw nothing, only the wind blowing loose flakes off broken panels and the shadows moving as the clouds above shifted, letting in streaks of pale blue light that danced on the ground like ghosts from the past. Another crunched, this time closer, and Jack dropped to one knee, hiding behind a fallen engine part, peering over the edge and catching a glimpse of something tall and armored, moving fast through the snow, following the same tracks he had been tracing moments ago. They were not just hunters now, they were following him, maybe guessing his path or watching him from above, waiting for a mistake, and his breath slowed as he checked his gear, setting traps behind him, small-time charges buried just beneath the surface, ready to explode with light and sound if triggered. He moved forward again, climbing a narrow ledge that wrapped around the canyon and brought him to a flat stretch of land where old ruins stood, half collapsed and covered in ice, once a research station, now silent and forgotten except by time and those who remembered its hidden corners. Inside the largest structure he found frozen crates stacked high and broken screens hanging from wires, and in the center of the room was a cage made from plasma bars, still active, glowing soft red and warm in the cold space, and inside it was something that made Jack freeze. A creature sat there, not human, not like the hunters either, small with wide eyes and long ears, skin pale like snow and trembling as it looked up at him with fear and confusion, and its voice came in small broken words through a collar translator, asking, "Who are you? Where is mother? Why am I here?" Jack stepped closer, carefully scanning the cage in the room, and saw old blood stains near the wall and fresh prints leading out the back. Someone had been here recently, and this small prisoner had seen them, had heard Something had maybe even known the child he rescued. He knelt and spoke softly, saying, "I am Jack. I found another child like you. I am looking for his mother. Maybe you know her, maybe you saw her. Please help me." And the small creature pointed with a shaking hand toward a sealed door at the far end of the room. Behind that door, Jack found a command panel, broken but fixable, and he rewired the circuits using his multi-tool fingers, quick and skilled from years of service. And when the door opened, the smell of burned metal hit him, and the sound of breathing reached his ears. Inside lay an injured raider arm, crushed beneath debris, eyes wide with pain and surprise as he saw Jack enter. And before he could speak, Jack pressed the cold barrel of his rifle against his neck and asked one question: "Where is she, the child's mother? Where did you take her?" The raider laughed weakly and said, "Sold, taken, gone already, halfway to the Frost City with the merchant ship." "You are too late, human, always too late." And Jack stared at him with steady eyes, then turned and walked out, leaving the raider behind in the silence of his own failure. He returned to the cage, opened it, released the small creature who followed him without question, scared but trusting, and together they made their way back through the snow, through the traps, through the cold, through the rising wind, now louder than before, as if warning them of what was still to come. At the cave entrance, Jack found the motion alarm blinking red. Someone had been there and left again, the tracks fresh, the snow disturbed, and his heart jumped as he rushed inside, finding the child still safe, still breathing, but clutching the pendant tightly and whispering words in his sleep. Jack knew now what he had to do. The Frost City was far dangerous, full of watchers and slavers and cold hearts that traded lives like coins, but he would go there. He would find the merchant ship, and he would bring her back, no matter the cost. He looked at the child, at the second one, now resting beside him. Both small, both innocent, both waiting for someone to protect them, and Jack made a silent vow in the dark that no more would be taken, and no more would be lost. The cold wind sang through the narrow mountain paths as Jack guided the two small alien children along the trail, his steps careful and quiet, his eyes always moving, scanning every rock, every shadow, every piece of ground that could hide danger, while the snow beneath his boots crunched softly like old bones breaking under pressure. The children walked close beside him, wrapped in blankets and warmed by small heating pads hidden under their clothes, their faces still pale, their eyes wide with fear and wonder and trust. And Jack could feel the weight of their hope pressing on his shoulders, heavier than any pack he had ever carried. He knew time was slipping away like sand through frozen fingers. The merchant ship carrying the child's mother was moving fast toward the Frost City, and once it reached the trade hub, she would disappear into the slave circuits, sold off to the highest bidder, and lost forever. Jack checked his scanner again and found a shortcut through a canyon marked by old signs from the war days, a place known for hidden traps and lost soldiers and deep crevices, where screens went down and never came back up. But it was the fastest path, and he could not risk delay. The sky above turned darker, clouds gathering thick and heavy like a curtain of ash, and Jack pressed forward, leading the children through the first gate, an archway made of rusted metal bones with warning signs still flickering, weak red lights blinking out a forgotten message of danger inside. The canyon, the world changed. Narrow walls rose on both sides, jagged and sharp with pieces of broken machines wedged into the rock, old battle drones, long dead, half melted and blackened by ancient fire, and some still holding weapons now fused with ice and silence. Jack moved slowly, watching the ground for pressure plates or laser tripwires, and he found them easily, most still active, hidden beneath snow or disguised as harmless rocks, and he used his tools to disable each one with calm hands and focused breath, while the children watched with silent awe. Halfway through the canyon, a soft click echoed, and Jack froze, one foot already pressing down on something that did not belong, and his mind screamed as he slowly pulled back his boot and saw a thin metal rod rise from the snow with a blinking red tip and a sound like charging energy. Without a word, he grabbed both children and dove behind a thick metal crate just as the trap exploded in a flash of light and sound, sending snow and smoke into the air. and shaking the walls of the canyon with a deep rumble that faded into eerie silence. The children clung to him, shaking with fear, and he whispered soft words to calm them, saying, "It's okay, we're okay, just a scratch, just a scare," and he gave them a warm drink from his pack before moving again. This time even slower, even more careful. At the far end of the canyon, Jack found what he had been hoping for. A hidden trader camp built under an overhang with lights covered by snow and heat signals. Faint but real, and inside he knew someone there would have answers. Someone would know the route of the ship and the name of the buyer, he told the children. To stay hidden near the edge under thermal covers, then walked into the camp with hands up and weapon lowered as strange faces turned to look at him. Some human, some not, some scarred by war, and others by greed, and all of them watching him with cold interest. A tall woman with metal arms stepped forward, her voice rough and full of suspicion, asking, "What do you want, stranger?" And Jack answered clear and calm, saying, "I need information. I'm tracking the ship carrying a slave woman taken from the Northern Valley 2 nights ago. Tell me who took her and where they are going." The woman laughed and said, "Nothing comes free." And Jack reached into his coat, pulling out a piece of high-grade tech, a power cell worth more than gold, and held it up in silence until she reached for it with a greedy grin and nodded toward a tent in the back inside. The tent sat a man with small eyes and sharp teeth, holding a datapad and sipping hot tea, and he looked up slowly as Jack entered, saying, "You're late. The woman is gone, sold to the Frost Market, delivered by dawn. But maybe I know more. Maybe I forgot the details unless reminded." Jack placed his blade on the table slowly and said, "You remember now, or I start carving memories into your skin." And the man chuckled, but the knife never moved, and the silence between them grew heavy until he spoke again. Fine, she's on the trader ship, Silver Fang, headed to Sector 13, under guard name listed as Asset 9. Jack took the information and left quickly, knowing there was no time for questions or delay. He gathered the children, told them the plan, and used his beacon to call his hidden snow skimmer, a fast vehicle buried under ice now rising from the snow with engine humming and lights bright. They climbed in, Jack at the controls. The children huddled behind him as the vehicle sped across the frozen plain, wind roaring past them, and the stars above beginning to shine through cracks in the clouds, and the mountains shrinking behind as the Frost City lights blinked ahead on the horizon. The chase was on. The Silver Fang had hours of lead time and heavy protection, but Jack had something stronger, the will of 2 innocent souls behind him, the promise he made to a frightened child in a storm, and the fire in his heart that would not stop until the mother was free. The snow skimmer cut across the icy plains like a blade through silk, the wind screaming around them as Jack held the controls with steady hands, eyes locked on the horizon where the faint glow of Frost City rose like a burning promise in the dark. And behind him the 2 alien children sat huddled under thermal blankets, watching the frozen world blur past in silence. The engine hummed with power, the upgraded core pulling heat from the surrounding air and pushing the vehicle faster than any standard model. And Jack knew they were pushing the limits, but he did not care because every second mattered now, and every delay could mean the difference between rescue and regret. He tapped the screen on the console, bringing up the map again, and saw the red dot labeled Silver Fang still moving ahead toward the main dock near the Frost Market, a place where deals were made in shadows and names were forgotten with the next cold wind, and he had to reach it before the gates closed. The children did not speak, but Jack could feel their eyes on him, full of hope and fear and questions they could not put into words, and he did not speak either because every word in his throat was heavy with weight and time and the growing pressure of the promise he carried like a burning stone. Sudden jolt rocked the skimmer as it hit a patch of rough ice, and Jack pulled hard on the controls, guiding the craft back to smooth ground, and the younger child let out a soft gasp but held tight to the seat, and Jack reached back with one hand squeezing the boy's shoulder in silent comfort. Storm clouds gathered in the distance, a wall of gray moving fast, and Jack knew the final stretch would not be easy. The Frost City was known for its sudden blizzards and biting winds, and as they got closer the temperature dropped and the skimmer's shields flickered under the strain. He activated emergency heat protocols and rerouted power from the secondary systems to keep the children warm, letting the outer shell take the brunt of the cold, while inside they stayed safe, wrapped in a bubble of warmth and light that moved through the storm like a ghost. Chasing the past lights appeared ahead, red and blue and gold, blinking through the snow as towers and walls came into view, and the outline of the city grew larger, filled with noise and life, and the cold heart of the trade empire beating with the Iowa rhythm of credits and chains. And Jack gritted his teeth as he approached. He parked the skimmer near a hidden path on the western edge, avoiding the main gates and using old tunnels from the war era, now forgotten by most but still marked in Jack's private maps. And he led the children through narrow halls and frozen doors, each step bringing them closer to danger and hope inside the city. The air was thick with steam and voices, the heat from the underground systems melting snow and sending clouds into the alleys where traders shouted and machines roared and lights flashed with deals, and faces changed under the flicker of neon signs. Jack kept his hood low, moving fast through the crowd. The children closed behind him, and his scanner led him toward Dock 17, where the Silver Fang was preparing for departure, its engines glowing and crates being loaded under the watchful eyes of armored guards. He stopped behind a stack of cargo and checked the roster through a hacked signal, confirming that Asset 9 was still aboard, still alive, still waiting, and his heart beat faster, not with fear, but with purpose, because the moment was here. The choice was now, and Jack never backed down from promises. He turned to the children, whispered instructions, told them where to hide and what to do if he did not return, then handed the older one a small communicator linked to his beacon and made him promise to run if things went wrong. And the child nodded, eyes wide and shining with silent bravery. Jack approached the ship, moving through the shadows, past guards and workers using noise and distraction and old tricks from long ago days when stealth was a language and silence was survival. And he reached the loading ramp just as the last crate was being moved. He saw her then inside a cage, like an animal, bruised but breathing, eyes scanning the crowd and face filled with tired hope. And when her gaze met his, something changed in the air, something sharp and powerful like lightning inside the storm, and Jack felt the weight of the journey lift. He moved fast, disabling the nearest guard with a strike to the throat, grabbing the access key and unlocking the cage in one motion. And she gasped as the door opened, and Jack said quietly, "I promised him I'd bring you home." And she reached out, her hand touching his like it was made of light. Alarms sounded the moment the cage opened, red lights flashing and voices shouting, and Jack grabbed her hand, pulling her into cover as the ship guards rushed forward, weapons drawn and angry, and the world around them turned to noise and fire and chaos. But Jack was faster, moving like wind and flame, dodging and striking and guiding her through the maze of crates and corridors until they reached the children, hiding just as the ship's engines began to power up. And escape was closing fast like a door in a storm. They ran together through the streets of Frost City, pursued by hunters and shadows and cold metal eyes, but they did not stop, because ahead was the skimmer, and freedom, and the warmth of a promise kept burning brighter than the snow could ever freeze. Snow slammed against the sides of the skimmer as Jack pushed the controls harder than ever, the engine screaming beneath them as the narrow escape from Frost City turned into a blur of flashing lights and chasing shadows, the air filled with alarms and distant shouting. As guards scrambled to follow through frozen streets and echoing towers, the mother held her son tightly in her arms, tears running down her cheeks, warm against his cold skin, as he buried his face into her shoulder, breathing in the scent he thought he had lost forever, while the second child clung to Jack's arm, eyes filled with silent wonder and trust as the storm outside grew heavier. Jack said nothing, his eyes locked on the trail ahead as warning lights blinked across the console, power levels dropping fast, shields flickering from the blizzard, and long-range sensors showing 3 small crafts lifting off from Frost City. marked as security patrol units heading straight for them with high-speed intercept routes. He rerouted power from secondary heat units to the engine boosting speed and watching as the children pressed closer together under the emergency blanket, sharing warmth and hope, while the woman looked at Jack with a quiet strength in her eyes that told him she was ready to face anything if it meant staying with her son behind. Then the first patrol ship fired a warning shot that burst near the ice surface, sending up a cloud of snow and smoke, but Jack didn't flinch. He adjusted the stabilizers and cut left, diving toward a frozen canyon, using the terrain to break line of sight and lose the signal lock from the pursuers. Walls of the canyon rose fast on both sides, sharp and covered with ice and old mining scars where metal once poured from. Deep tunnels now sealed and buried, and Jack used every memory of the maps he had studied to guide the skimmer through tight turns and falling debris with speed and control. One of the patrol ships clipped a wall in pursuit, vanishing in a bright flash as fire and snow filled the sky behind them. But the other two stayed close, weaving through the canyon with relentless precision, forcing Jack to use every trick he knew just to stay ahead and keep them alive. He pulled hard on the right lever, slamming the skimmer into a side tunnel and blasting through a thin ice wall into a hidden route used long ago by smugglers and forgotten by most. And as they emerged into a wide valley of silence, the scanners blinked once and then cleared. No ships, no threats, no danger, just snow. The skimmer slowed and coasted across the valley, Jack letting out a deep breath as the wind calmed and the stars began to show above them, piercing through clouds, now breaking apart, revealing the sky once hidden behind storms and smoke. And for the first time in hours, everything was still. He turned to the woman, who was now humming softly, a song meant for comfort and peace, as her son drifted to sleep in her arms, safe and warm and alive. And the second child rested his head against her side, as if drawn to the feeling of family that filled the small space like light. Jack smiled softly and opened the compartment, pulling out food packs and warm drinks, handing them around and sitting beside them, his body aching from the journey, but his heart steady, knowing the mission was complete and the promise had been kept and something good had been restored in a cold world. The woman looked at him and spoke in her language, soft and grateful, and the translator whispered, "Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for finding him. Thank you for saving me." And Jack nodded slowly, feeling the weight of her words settle deep inside, where his own pain had once lived. They spent the night in a hidden cave near the edge of the valley, shielded from the wind by stone and ice, and warmed by the heat of survival in new bonds. As Jack repaired the skimmer and watched the fire crackle beside them, sending shadows dancing on the walls like silent guardians, the children slept close together, holding hands and dreaming of skies without storms, while the woman leaned against the rock, eyes closed and breathing slow, as Jack sat awake for one last watch, rifle across his lap and eyes on the stars, as if searching for something he could never quite name. Morning came with golden light breaking across the snow, lighting the world with colors never seen during the storm, and Jack stood quietly, stretching his arms and looking out at the long road ahead, not one of danger now, but of healing and new paths filled with hope. They traveled together across the white plains, leaving behind the city of chains and the hunters who chased them, heading toward a distant shelter Jack knew well, a place where they could start over, free from fear and full of possibilities, where names mattered and family meant everything. When they reached the shelter, Jack stepped aside, letting the woman and children enter first, and watched as others inside rushed to help, offering blankets and food and warm hands and kind smiles. And Jack felt something in his chest ease, as if a frozen part of him had begun to thaw. He turned to leave, ready to continue his journey, but the small hand of the first child caught his coat, pulling gently, and Jack looked down into eyes that said, "Stay." And the woman stepped forward, offering him the glowing pendant now charged with light. Holding it out with both hands as a gift, Jack hesitated, then took it gently, closing his fingers around the warmth and nodding once, the fire in his heart burning bright as he stepped forward into the light. And the door closed behind them with the sound of wind fading into silence. There in the shelter of warmth and family, the cold world outside lost its power, and something new began, something stronger than snow, something brighter than the storm, something forever.